The Museum Roadshow is brought to you by 125 Apparel.
Thank you all for coming today. My name is Greta Gook, and I am the new director of the Detroit Lakes Public Library. I've been at the DL Library since September of 2017. I was the children's librarian prior to becoming the director in January. Very excited to be in this new position, to get to know the community better, to work together. It's so exciting to be able to come and listen to all the cool things that the museum is doing and that the theater is doing, and that I just have been very impressed by the DL community. You guys have so many awesome things going on in this community, so I'm just really excited to have the library play our part in making this a fantastic community. I'm actually originally from Perm, is where I grew up and where I graduated high school, so I'm very familiar with DL. DL was like on Friday night when we got into high school. If you could drive to DL and go to the movie, or maybe you'd go to Perkins, that was like top notch. That was really a good Friday night. So DL was always kind of like that was a destination. And after high school, I moved away from Perm. I did my undergraduate degree down in Minneapolis. I lived in Minneapolis for a while. Then I went to graduate school in Milwaukee. So kind of was living the big city life. Got my Master's of Library Science degree and worked in libraries in North Dakota, in Wisconsin. And then a year and a half ago, came back to Perm and started working at the DL Library, and it's just been fantastic, and I'm really glad to be back. As a small town girl, I know when I graduated high school, I was like, couldn't get out of Perm fast enough, like, get me out of here, how can people live here, this is ridiculous. But really now, I'm just embrace it wholeheartedly. This is the place to live, like, seriously. So I really am really excited to be at the DL Library, and especially because of our topic today, the history of the DL Library. They really have a rich history. I think the history really shows how dedicated our community is to the library, and really right from the get-go with the library has really been a community effort. And so as your Brown Bag Lunch speaker today, it's particularly an honor to be here because this week we are celebrating National Library Week. So the theme for National Library Week is Libraries Equal Strong Communities. And you actually today have not one, but two librarians with you. My guest today is Liz Lynch, who is the director of the Lake Agassiz Regional Library System, which is Detroit Lakes is a branch of the Lake Agassiz system. So Liz and myself will represent the library for you today. And I think that this year's theme is especially pertinent to today's topic, the history of the Detroit Lakes Public Library, because I think you will see that the impetus to start the library in Detroit Lakes and what remains one of our core values today is the importance of a public library to a community. This year's theme illustrates how today's libraries are at the heart of our cities, our towns, our schools, and our campuses. We provide critical resources, programs, and expertise. We also provide a public space where all community members, regardless of age, culture, or income level, can come together to connect and learn. I feel that the founding mothers of the Detroit Lakes Library had the vision to see that by bringing a public library to our community, they would be benefiting all of its residents for generations to come, and would be greatly providing for the health and vitality of the community. And I think that continues on today. But to start the story of the DL Library, we have to go back 112 years to the small town of Detroit. So we're not yet Detroit Lakes, we're still just Detroit. So before it was Detroit Lakes and before there was a public library. In Detroit Lakes, the name was changed on September 7th of 1926 because it was often confused with Detroit, Michigan. So 1926 we became Detroit Lakes. But when the library started, we were just Detroit. So here is downtown DL. This is circa 1909. But you can see it's kind of a hubbub of activity, I would say. But going back a couple years from 1909, so I bring you to September 9th of 1907 to the home of Mrs. Mamie Bolander, who was the wife of the superintendent of schools. And the Bayview Reading Club was in the midst of a serious discussion about the future of their club. And after a lengthy discussion, it was decided that the name would be changed to the Library Club. And their interest would be centered in books and the possibility of providing a library for the community, which at that time had a population of about 2,500 people. Mrs. Harriet Weeks presided at the meeting, and Mrs. Mamie Bolander was elected president, Mrs. Harriet Weeks vice president, Mrs. Phoebe Phillips secretary, and Mrs. Mabel G. Annenson treasurer. And altogether there were 16 charter members, all women, of the newly formed library club. It was decided that the meetings were to be held every second and fourth Tuesday of the month from 3 to 5 o'clock. The objective of the club was to be the intellectual and moral uplift of our young people. And its motto was kindliness and earnestness, which I think is awesome. I think I'm going to put that on my business card. Yeah, so their motto was kindliness and earnestness. That's how they were going to operate their club. The dues were $1.50 a year, which the Library Club still meets, and our dues are now $3 a year. So really, we really kept up. Bylaws were adopted, and thus the Library Club was officially established. It was decided to hold a book shower as a beginning for the library, which they hoped would one day become a reality. And the book shower brought in 100 books, including the donation of a traveling library by Mr. McGregor, one of the local druggists. And I had to look up what is a traveling library. So this is just a picture of a traveling library from around the time. We can see it says Vermont Free Public Library. But it looks to be just like a little crate, 2 shelves. It had the books in there. So before the established public libraries, this could be brought from town to town, could on the stagecoach or however, and then I'm assuming could be purchased as a set. So maybe you would purchase a set of classics or something like that. So one of these was donated by the local druggist, and then a donation of Harper's Weekly was donated by Dr. Emma K. Ogden. So the whole community is donating materials. They're going to get this library started. During this time, the club also voted to join the Federations of Women's Clubs, which I think this could be a whole other topic. The Federations of Women's Clubs really had a really important role in starting public libraries across the country and also other social movements. So the Detroit Library Club recognized that they were part of this larger cultural and social movement across the United States. So now the club had some books, but they needed to find a place to house them. And after some inquiries, it was reported that the members of the Congregational Church would donate a room in the church basement. And thus, the first library in Detroit was established, housed first in the basement of the Congregational Church. And this is a photo of the Congregational Church right after construction in the spring of 1893. So that was where the library was first housed. The club members did their own janitorial work, and by April 28th, 1908, all the books were marked and cataloged. So they could be circulated, they could be searched for. They had an up and running library in the basement of the church. $35 was spent for new books. So $35 now, that would be about $1,000. So it's a fair amount, I would say. You could get some new books. And that spring, the club interested the school children in Arbor Day, and they helped plant 129 trees. So that they weren't just checking out books, they were right from the get-go providing programming, bringing the kids in, contributing back to the community right from the start, even before they had an established library building. The library soon outgrew its space in the church basement, and so a committee was appointed to look for new quarters, and they found a room at the back of the First National Bank building and moved the library there. And this is the First National Bank building, circa 1905 question mark was, so around 1905. And my understanding that this bank was torn down to make room for Veterans Memorial Park. Is that right? Or was that location? Yep. So now there was space for library club meetings as well as shelf room for all the books, but as luck would have it, they wouldn't stay at this location for long.
The Museum Roadshow is brought to you by 125 Apparel.